so that the bureaucrats would rule in a very, woke direction and against what I would argue are the American people's best interests.
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be discussing the woke virus, and you're going to uncover the urgent need to address the woke agenda's war on oil and gas and the crucial steps required for DOGE to dismantle this absurd and toxic ideology. My guest today is Tyler O'Neill. Tyler is a senior editor at the Daily Signal and the author of The Woketopus. Great to have you on the show today, Tyler. Well, Tyler, it's great to have you on the show today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I like the title of your new book, The Woketopus. Can you tell us a little bit about it and why you decided to write it?
Yeah. So it's the Woketopus, the dark money cabal manipulating the federal government. And I gave it that title because I thought Americans need to know how the shots are actually called in Washington. What I saw during the Biden administration, we all remember that President Biden wasn't exactly always all there all the time, calling those lids early in the day, really big questions about his health that even the legacy media couldn't keep under wraps after that first debate with President Trump. So we have a lot of people wondering who is actually making the decisions in the Biden administration. And my book has some of the answers to that. I feel like the entire answers might be too long to explain. But when you get into which groups were sending their staff into the administrative state and then writing memos and pushing their ideas in the administrative state so that the bureaucrats would rule in a very, woke direction and against what I would argue are the American people's best interests. This is what you see, and this is what my book really focuses on. There are two basic aspects of it. Part of it is the left's dark money network, where these big donors like George Soros and his Open Society foundations, Arabella Advisors, the Tides Foundation, are funneling money to these woke activist groups, and then those groups are staffing and advising the administrative state. And this is important because many Americans may know, of the Constitution, the checks and balances, the different branches we have in the Constitution. Well, you kind of need to forget a lot of that, because the way the government actually works in D.C. is you have this vast administrative state that technically falls under the president, but isn't always held accountable to the president. What we're seeing right now is President Trump is trying to get a handle on the administrative state, and the courts are blocking him and preventing him from doing so. So this administrative state and how it has been influenced is really the focus of the book.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's definitely got the right timing as far as that to come out because, I think a lot of people, including myself, I think that, even with the Biden administration being as bad as it was, it did shed a lot of light on a lot of these unelected bureaucrats that are physically running the country in the background. And it was amazing to me, how they infiltrated the oil and gas sector as well.
Yeah. That is a huge chapter of my book, the energy chapter. I talk about the green revolving door and influence network. And so you get a guy the guy is John Podesta. He was chosen by President Biden to influence, and you probably remember when they were pushing their Inflation Reduction Act.
Right.
All the time ahead of the passage of the bill, it was always like, this is going to bring prices down. As soon as it passes, Biden is praising it and saying, this is the greatest investment in green energy in a generation. And I'm like, so what is it? Are you funneling money to your green cronies? Or are you actually combating inflation? Well, I think the American people can see the proof in the pudding. And John Podesta was the guy who not only founded a group called the Center for American Progress, not only was Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman in 2016, but he also has a lot of these ties to the big money donors behind the left's dark money network. And he worked with them in various cases to direct this funding. So you get this huge green slush fund in the Inflation Reduction Act, and nobody is better connected to send that money back to his cronies than John Podesta.
So I was reading one of your articles, I think you wrote about how these bureaucrats, that are in the Green New Deal, say, for example, and now that, Trump and them are exposing that, they just seem to change their titles and kind of try to fall back into the bureaucracy and I guess kind of wait him out. Is that what their plan is? Or is that how that works?
Yes. Yeah. So there are a lot of these bureaucrats who were hired and given titles like Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. It's usually DEIA. They had the accessibility at the end there too. But they decided, when Trump was coming in, that they would change their names. And so you get this weird phenomenon where you go to a federal agency and the website, if you look at the staff page, back in, November, December 2024, it says DEI officer, inclusion officer, CRT officer. And then you go to the modern version of the page and it says senior advisor or senior associate. And suddenly all these DEI titles just poof, vanish out of thin air. So you get the situation, Trump coming into office, a lot of these bureaucrats know that the jig is up to one degree or another, but they think they can stay in their jobs and oppose the new administration from within. And unfortunately, during the last administration, they were able to do that to some degree. And we saw this really revealing poll that 64% of Washington, D.C. based federal employees who voted for Kamala Harris in the last election said they would not follow a lawful Trump order if they considered it to be bad policy. And right there, I think that is the definition of what I call the deep state effort against Trump.
So how has the left been so successful in infiltrating all these groups? I mean, I hear about it on TV now all the time, with Doge and all the other stuff, how they're trying to uncover a lot of this money that seems to be funneled from the taxpayer to somebody like a George Soros's company. And then they turn around and put all of these leftist, people in these cities, the district attorneys, and they pretty much can take over the government like that or kind of, will the government on which direction it moves. How does all that happen?
Yeah, so the answer is complicated, but to some degree, it boils down to money and connections and influence. So you get somebody like George Soros, who, he has been funding pretty much every leftist cause you've ever heard of for a long, long time. So if you scratch the surface behind any of these big left-wing activist groups, you're usually going to find some funding from an organization called Open Society Foundations, or one of its allied partners, the Open Society Policy Institute, Foundation for Open Society. They have a bunch of arms, but they're all essentially the same organization. And Open Society Foundation funnels a lot of this money. And Open Society Foundation also has a long history of working closely with USAID. And this is, I have to be careful here because Open Society has come out with a statement saying like, oh, there have been these false claims that Open Society is getting money from USAID and is directing the money for USAID and calling the shots there. And I'm like, well, I don't claim specifically that Open Society is being bankrolled by USAID. But what I do know for certain is that you have been funding the same projects that USAID has been funding, and these projects should really shock Americans that our tax dollars are going to them. And it should be surprising to us that a lot of this money from the federal purse is flowing along the same lines as George Soros' funding. Like, as you said, he's the guy behind the soft on crime rogue prosecutors movement. But he also funded many of these influence campaigns I cover in the book, efforts to crack down on oil and gas. Groups like, I believe the Sierra Club has funding from Open Society Foundations. But many of these organizations, and if they don't have Open Society, they do have Arabella, they do have the Tides Foundation. They get money there, and Tides has received money directly from USAID. So the left's massive dark money and influence campaign is everywhere. And this is the kind of thing that Elon Musk is trying to expose. And I was focused on the Biden administration because that was when the influence became extremely obvious and very easy for me to track. But I have this great chart that lays out everything, and it'll make your head spin, all the different actors involved.
I think I read over the weekend that Stacey Abrams, she was given almost $2 billion, whether, as far as for some green initiative. And before they were given this money, or, the money was going to be allotted to them, they had only made $100 in their whole company, and they had never managed any money in the past. And I think the law read, it said, well, 90 days after we give you this money, you got to take a management class to determine how to manage the money. I mean, is that blatant?
Quite revealing.
Crazy.
Yeah, well, and that's part of this, is this mentality of we're scratching each other's backs and promoting the same causes. And so all these people are flocking together. And so it does surprise me to some degree because of how extreme it is, but it doesn't surprise me, knowing what I do about the way these activist groups work, that they had so much influence. And I think it's really important what Doge, what Elon Musk, what President Trump are working so hard to expose, because the American people should be asking where our tax dollars are going. And when the answers are this extreme, when you're talking about taxpayer money for a transgender opera in a far-flung part of the world, it's just like, okay, why can't we take care of Americans here at home? Like, can we first take care of Americans here at home, and then maybe we can care about actually helping people? But these weird ideological pursuits that you're doing are, and they also put America off on the wrong foot in many of these countries, because you have a country that's pretty conservative, and then suddenly the U.S. is funding all the LGBTQ array, immediately. What are citizens of that country going to think? They're going to think that the United States stands for something they don't believe in, and that's actually going to hurt our standing in the world, not help it.
So, like you were saying, when a lot of this money gets shipped off to these foreign countries, does it ever reach the cause? Some of it may, but I'm sure there's a lot of hands dipping in that jar all along the way, right? Or
I don't know for certain how much of it makes it all the way. I'm pretty sure. So that's the other weird thing about all of this, is that this administration has said, for instance, in NIH grants, for science grants, there is a concern that not all of the money will go directly to the research. So what do? They have a high budget for overhead. So suddenly, you get one grant that's one number, and then you get extra money for overhead. And the Trump administration wanted to say, oh, well, let's keep overhead to no more than 15% of the original grant, right? That seems like a reasonable thing to do. Well, a judge struck that down, saying that it was illegal for the Trump administration to require that overhead only reach 15%. So this is the level of absurdity that we're seeing, where the federal government has not been valuing our taxpayer dollars in the way that Americans would want them to be valued. And so suddenly, you have all this extra money funding various places, and now we have judges saying that when a new president wants to crack down on some of this abuse, he can't do it.
Yeah. And of course, the government, like in the Green New Deal, they only dole out money or grants to people that support their cause, right? The people, if they're on the wrong side of what the administration wants, they don't get grants to write their papers and research.
Well, it's funny because, yes, that's true. I've been involved with, I've been friends of many conservative organizations that have been falsely branded hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they sometimes find it hard to get a credit card processor, much less a grant from the government. And now we're seeing a judge come in and say that it is viewpoint discrimination for the Trump administration to say we don't want to fund this group with taxpayer dollars anymore. And I'm just sitting here like, this is so flabbergasting because it is not viewpoint discrimination to say that the government doesn't want to support a specific cause or another specific cause. Like, these are extra funds from the government. This isn't the United States saying you have to abide by different rules if you believe a certain thing or not. This is saying the American people don't believe that DEI or climate change should be a big issue that we're funneling our money toward, and we want to stop that. But now we have a judge saying that's viewpoint discrimination. I mean, it's so far outside of normal, basic legal common sense.
I'm assuming that the Trump administration will eventually win, right? But it just takes time to work through the court system, which buys them time. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So it buys them time. It makes it more likely that they can try to cover their tracks. I think it's very important for these things to be revealed as quickly as possible and as fully as possible. And, right now we're seeing a judge saying that Trump can't fire someone.
Yeah.
Like, he's the head of the executive branch, and he can't theoretically fire a special counsel. And I mean, it's just the level to which, the Constitution is very clear. It says the executive power will be vested in a president of the United States. If the president cannot control the executive branch, is he really still the president?
It's amazing. So what kind of advice would you give the oil and gas industry?
Well, I would say the number one thing you need to do is not be so scared of your own product. Like, you're not going to end the world by drilling for more oil. You're not going to end the world by burning more fossil fuels. Right now, we have this, the climate alarmist, and I was so glad to see the Associated Press kicked out of the White House for their biased reporting. They have been trying to silence the idea of any opposition to climate alarmism. But essentially, what we have to say, and we need to say this over and over again, carbon emissions have been the most reliable and cheapest form of energy in a long time. The only thing that's more reliable is nuclear. But we need to celebrate the fact that since we have been burning since we have been burning fossil fuels, the world has climbed out of poverty to levels that would have been unimaginable for previous generations. I mean, the fact that you and I are sitting here talking to each other across hundreds of miles on electronic devices that our ancestors would have never believed possible, that we can drive to places, that we can enjoy nature. Not only can we live better lives because of fossil fuels, we can enjoy nature better because of fossil fuels. I can go to Yellowstone National Park and enjoy and love the fact that we have this gorgeous, natural park. And I wouldn't be able to do that without the advances that we've seen with fossil fuels. So we need to get over this idea that we're somehow doing something bad for the world by burning fossil fuels. The amount of emissions is minuscule, and thank God it's gotten so much cleaner. There used to be smog over all American cities. Oh, yeah. Now they're extremely clean. And we have to get away from this notion that the climate alarmists are right. Because if you look at the actual data, the statistics, people are not dying at higher rates from extreme weather events. And notice how they say, oh, it's going to be global warming. Oh, no, now it's climate change. So they can attribute anything to it. So now it's not just rising sea levels. They say, oh, hurricanes are getting worse. But you look at the data, they're not actually getting worse. They're pretty much staying where they've been for a long period of time. Yes, there are disasters that we need to prepare for. Yes, there are things that we need to help. But we need to focus, and this is the thing about the green movement to me that always surprises me, because I'm a natural conservationist. I grew up in Colorado. I cleaned out brush to prevent wildfires in my home. Like, this is something I care deeply about. And yet I've seen these green groups that are more focused on cracking down on the most reliable, cheapest form of energy than they are on actually helping the environment. And that is an extreme travesty, in my opinion.
It really is, especially when you got people like John Kerry flying around the world negotiating deals on behalf of the Biden administration.
Yeah.
It's still, there's no accountability for those type of people, right? They just go out and spend government money and do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is there's this system that the elites have put in place where, it's seen as virtuous for someone like John Kerry to do this. And,
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Coming on the show today, Tyler. And can you tell people how to get a copy of your book?
Yes. Yeah. So the book, again, is The Woketopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government. It's available on Amazon. Also, if you just search on Google or DuckDuckGo, Woketopus, it'll be your top result. We have ebook, paperback, hardcover. Coming in April will be the audiobook, which I'm very excited about.
Great. I'm going to get a copy of it. I think I like the name, and I just want to learn more about it. It sounds like it's very, very interesting.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'd love to have you back in the future.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.